He was born in the United States, destined for greatness. He became El Menchito, the crown prince of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Mexico's most violent criminal empire. From the shadow of his father, El Mencho, he commanded an army of hitmen, ordered more than 100 murders, and planned to flood the world with fentanyl. His power was so absolute that he dared to shoot down a military helicopter with a rocket launcher. But the same citizens who gave him a passport to the world became the key to his cage dot today. Rubén Oseguera González is no longer a prince. He is a prisoner serving a life sentence in a US prison. How did the heir who seemed untouchable fall? This is the story of the rise and fall of El Menchito. It's a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. The air is cold, sterile. There is no room here for the power and glory of the drug trade. Seated at the defendant's table is Rubén Oseguera González. He is no longer El Menchito, the crown prince of Mexico's most feared cartel. Now, he's just another inmate in a blue prison jumpsuit, a ghost far from his kingdom of violence and luxury. The judge reads the sentence. The words land with a relentless, final force: life in prison. And to ensure there isn't the slightest hope of freedom, another 30 years are added on top. A lifetime, and then some, behind bars. All eyes are on him, waiting for a reaction. A sign of defiance, of anger, of despair, but there is nothing. Witnesses in the courtroom describe his face as a stone mask. He shows no emotion. He remains motionless, in absolute silence, following his lawyer's advice. It is the image of total defeat. The man who ordered the deaths of hundreds, moved tons of drugs, and challenged a government, now has no voice, no power. The scene raises an inevitable question. How did the heir to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel end up here? How did the man born with American citizenship, destined to rule a criminal empire, end up stripped of everything in a foreign court? This isn't just the story of an arrest, it is the chronicle of a dynasty's fall. **** to understand his end, you have to go back to the beginning. Rubén Oseguera González was born on February 14, 1990, in San Francisco, California. This simple fact, his American citizenship, would become the final irony of his life. The key the United States would use to lock his cage forever. His destiny was written in his blood. His father was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, an almost mythical figure who rose from being a poor avocado farmer to become the most wanted man in Mexico, and one of the most sought after by the United States. El Mencho was the supreme leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a criminal organization known for its brutality and rapid expansion. The governments of Mexico and the United States offered multi-million-dollar rewards for his head, a testament to his power and danger. But his father's power wasn't the only part of his inheritance. His mother, Rosalinda González Valencia, came from another criminal dynasty. Her family, particularly her brothers, led a group known as Los Queenies. They weren't just allies of the Jalisco cartel, they were its financial engine. They specialized in global money laundering, and a DEA source once described them as the richest drug trafficking organization in the world. The marriage of El Mencho and Rosalinda was the merger of two empires, the brute force and military power of one, with the immense fortune and financial savvy of the other. Rubén Oseguera González, El Menchito, was the product of that union. The designated heir not just to a cartel, but to a criminal conglomerate. He went by many aliases, like El Jr. or El Rubenchito, but the world would know him by the diminutive of his father's nickname, a name that forever tied him to a legacy of terror. El Menchito was not a passive heir waiting for his turn. He earned his place, demonstrating a cruelty and ambition that matched, and at times surpassed, his father's. He rose quickly to become the undisputed second-in-command of the Jalisco cartel, managing the organization's most critical and violent operations. His main responsibility was international logistics. between 2007 and 2017. He was the mastermind behind shipping tons of cocaine and methamphetamine from Mexico to the streets of the United States. But his power was built not just on logistics, but on terror. He commanded his own army of assassins, an elite group chillingly called the High Command Special Forces. During his trial in the United States, the accusations painted a terrifying portrait. He was accused of ordering the murders of more than 100 people. He was said to have personally executed rivals and members of his own organization. Kidnapping and torture weren't exceptions. They were his tools of the trade. But El Menchito was also an innovator of crime. He expanded the cartel's operations into new businesses, like large-scale fuel theft, known as huachicoleo, and most sinister of all, he was a pioneer of the opioid crisis that poisons the United States today. Testimonies revealed that as early as 2013, long before the epidemic reached its deadliest peaks, he was talking about his plans. He wanted to make it big. He wanted to build an empire with fentanyl, flooding the market with counterfeit oxycodone pills. His princely status was even reflected in his weapons. He owned custom AR-15 assault rifles, engraved with the insignias CJNG to Junior and Menchito. They weren't just tools. They were his scepters, symbols of his identity and his absolute power within the cartel. ***4 years. El Menchito seemed untouchable, a ghost moving with impunity, but in early 2014, his luck appeared to change. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game with Mexican authorities, a series of events so bizarre they seemed straight out of a movie. In January 2014, he was arrested. For the first time in Zapopan, Jalisco, the capture was celebrated as a major victory against organized crime. But the victory was short-lived. In October of that year, a judge ordered his release, citing a lack of evidence. The scene was dramatic. Just as El Menchito stepped out of the prison, federal agents arrested him again. It seemed the system was correcting itself. But the farce wasn't over. In December, just 2 months later, another judge set him free again, concluding the evidence against him was insufficient. This time, El Menchito vanished without a trace. More than 6 months passed. In June 2015, authorities found him again. He had tried to change his identity, undergoing nose surgery to alter his face. When they captured him, he was with an arsenal of weapons, including his custom rifles. It looked like the definitive end, but incredibly, a month later, in July, a judge issued a new release order. This time, however, the authorities weren't going to make the same mistake. While the order was being processed, they arrested him again on other charges. The revolving door had finally slammed shut. This absurd cycle of captures and releases exposed the deep cracks in the Mexican justice system, where the line between incompetence and corruption is dangerously thin. El Menchito was back in a cell, but it was an event that occurred while he was free that sealed his fate forever. On May 1, 2015, the Mexican government launched Operation Jalisco, a massive deployment of military forces with a single objective: to capture his father, El Mencho. A military convoy, supported by 4 helicopters, located and closed in on the Kingpin's security detail. The cartel's response was a declaration of war. Jalisco cartel sicarios aimed a Russian-made RPG launcher at the sky and fired at a Mexican Army Cougar helicopter. The impact was devastating. The aircraft, with 18 people on board, was hit in the tail, spun out of control, and crashed in a fireball. 9 soldiers and federal police officers died instantly. US court documents would later reveal that El Menchito and his father personally directed the attack to allow them to escape. Downing a military aircraft wasn't an act of drug trafficking. It was an act of terrorism. The cartel had crossed a line from which there was no return. The Mexican government, humiliated and challenged, could no longer afford any more mistakes. El Menchito's capture a month later was no longer negotiable. His freedom was no longer an option. The game was over. A long pilgrimage through Mexico's maximum security prisons began. He was constantly moved between facilities in Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Sonora. Authorities feared the Jalisco cartel, with its immense power, would attempt a violent escape. El Menchito's legal battle was no longer for his freedom in Mexico, but a desperate fight to avoid the inevitable, his extradition to the United States. On February 21, 2020, after years of appeals and legal maneuvers, the final day of reckoning arrived. El Menchito was extradited to the United States. Last-minute protests from his lawyer, who alleged due process violations, were ignored. The prince landed in the country where he was born, but this time, as a prisoner. The trial was held in Washington, D.C. U.S. prosecutors left nothing to chance. Over 2 weeks, they methodically built an overwhelming case, detailing a decade of criminal activity from 2007 to 2017. They presented an arsenal of evidence, intercepted text messages where he coordinated drug shipments, unordered acts of violence, photographs of his custom weapons, and, most importantly, the testimony of former cartel members who turned against him. Witnesses described his meteoric rise in the organization, his direct role in over 100 murders, and his supervision of labs that produced more than 1,000 tons of methamphetamine. And they repeated, again and again, his darkest ambition, to build an empire based on fentanyl. The trial revealed something even more chilling. Even while imprisoned in Mexico awaiting extradition, El Menchito continued to run cartel operations from his cell, and during the trial itself in the United States, the Jalisco cartel deployed a spy network to monitor the agents and witnesses. In Mexico, in retaliation, they murdered the informant's family members. The message was clear: the cartel's power knew no borders, but inside that courtroom, his power vanished. The jury had no doubts. They found him guilty on all counts. The system he couldn't break in Mexico had devoured him in the United States. Back in the cold courtroom, the judge delivered the sentence: life in prison plus 30 years. And an order to forfeit more than $6 billion, the estimated profits from his drug empire. In a final twist of irony, his defense team made a request that he serve his sentence in a federal prison in California. The judge agreed to make the recommendation. The prince, who was born in California, would now be caged in California for the rest of his life. The U.S. Department of Justice called the sentence a victory. The man who built his identity on extreme violence was not defeated by a bulletin, a street war, but by the quiet paperwork and relentless bureaucracy of the law. His is the story of a prince destined to reign, whose own brutality and the accident of his birth on American soil conspired to lead him to a concrete cell. But the end of his story is not the end of the story. The prince is in a cage, but the king, his father El Mencho, remains at large. And the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, an organization that has proven to be resilient and adaptable, continues its global reign of terror. The capture of El Menchito was a battle won, but the war is far from over. Thank you for staying until the end. Behind every video are hours of research to bring you the complete story. If you value that effort, the best way to support us is by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. See you in the next investigation.